A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
You know, Herman, I was looking at the headlines this morning, and it feels like we are seeing the same pattern over and over again. Every major news outlet is focused on the kinetic side of the conflict. They are counting the number of ballistic missiles intercepted. They are showing satellite imagery of destroyed launches, and they are talking about the neutralization of Iran's conventional strike capabilities. It is almost like a missile fixation trap. People see a big explosion at a launch site, and they think, okay, the threat is handled. But I have been sitting here thinking about the prompt our housemate Daniel sent us today, and it really cuts through that noise. He is asking the question that actually matters for the long term. How do we know if the nuclear threat is actually gone?
That is exactly the right question to ask, Korn. And hello everyone, I am Herman Poppleberry. I have been diving into the technical reports on this all week because, honestly, the gap between public perception and the technical reality is massive right now. We see these spectacular strikes on the news, but as we have discussed before, especially back in episode 993 when we talked about the orbital shell game, what you see on the surface is often just the tip of the iceberg. Daniel's point about the fog of war is crucial here. While the world is watching the spectacular fireworks shows of missile interceptions, the real existential threat, the nuclear enrichment program, might be doing something much more subtle and much more dangerous. We are currently in March of 2026, and the fog of war is thicker than I have ever seen it in my career as an analyst.
It is a paradox, right? The kinetic strikes on conventional assets actually provide a kind of smokescreen. If you are the Iranian regime and you see your conventional missile batteries being picked off, you are not just going to sit there. You are going to use that chaos to move your most precious assets. And for them, the most precious asset is not a mobile launcher or a drone factory. It is the centrifuges and the enriched uranium. So today we are looking past the missiles. We are looking at the challenge of verifying nuclear neutralization in a world where the targets are buried under 80 meters of rock and the supply chains are becoming decentralized. We are talking about the difference between winning a battle and actually ending a threat.
Right, and we have to define our terms here because the media often uses nuclear breakout and nuclear neutralization interchangeably, but they are very different metrics. Breakout is a measure of time. It is how long it takes to go from 60% enriched uranium-235 to weapons-grade material, which is usually defined as over 90%. As of early 2026, we are talking about a window that has shrunk to almost nothing. Some estimates suggest they could have enough material for a device in less than a week if they decided to sprint. But neutralization? That is a permanent physical state. It means the infrastructure to enrich and the material itself have been rendered unusable. The problem is, how do you prove a negative? How do you prove that there is not a modular enrichment cell running in the basement of a nondescript textile factory in a civilian neighborhood?
That is the shift we are seeing. In episode 993, we talked about hidden missile cities, which are these massive underground complexes for launchers. But those are still relatively large footprints. You need big tunnels to move a ballistic missile. A centrifuge cascade, on the other hand, is modular. You can break it down. You can hide it in dual-use industrial sites. So, Herman, let's start with the hard stuff. Let's talk about the deep underground facilities, or DUFs. Everyone knows about Fordo, but what is the state of the art for hardening these sites in 2026? Because it feels like the shovel is currently winning the race against the bomb.
Fordow was the wake-up call for the West, but the Iranians have learned so much since then. If you look at the engineering standards they are using now at sites like the new Natanz complex, they have moved far beyond just digging a hole in a mountain. We are talking about facilities buried under 80 to 100 meters of reinforced rock and concrete. To put that in perspective for the listeners, the standard bunker buster that the United States uses, like the GBU-57 Massive Ordnance Penetrator or MOP, has a rated penetration depth that is significantly less than that in hard rock. We are talking about maybe 60 meters in the best case scenario. So, if you have a centrifuge hall sitting 85 meters down, you can hit the entrance, you can collapse the ventilation shafts, but the actual enrichment hardware remains intact. It is shielded by the very geology of the Iranian plateau.
So we can achieve a temporary mission kill by sealing the doors, but the capability remains. That is a huge distinction. If we're in an active kinetic conflict, and the goal is total neutralization, a mission kill is not enough. But here is my question, Herman. Even if we cannot reach them with a single bomb, we have high-resolution sensors now. We have synthetic aperture radar, or SAR, that can see through clouds and even penetrate the top layer of soil. We have thermal imaging. Surely we can tell if a facility like that is still drawing power or generating heat. If those centrifuges are spinning at supersonic speeds, they have to be generating some kind of signature, right?
You would think so, but this is where the Iranians have become incredibly sophisticated. They have integrated heat exchangers into the natural geology. Instead of venting hot air directly into the atmosphere where a thermal satellite can pick it up, they dissipate that thermal signature through massive underground water reservoirs or deep rock heat sinks. It is basically geothermal cooling in reverse. And as for power, they are not just plugging into the national grid anymore. They have decentralized microgrids and hardened backup power systems that are buried just as deep as the centrifuges. They use small, modular diesel generators or even small-scale nuclear reactors for power that are completely decoupled from the visible infrastructure. So, from a remote sensing perspective, a fully operational deep underground facility can look exactly like a dormant one. The thermal delta is zero.
That is terrifying because it means our traditional battle damage assessment, or BDA, is essentially useless for these sites. Usually, the military looks for secondary explosions or changes in thermal output to confirm a target is destroyed. If those signals are masked, we are flying blind. This brings me back to something we touched on in episode 716, which was about nuclear precision and striking sites without the fallout. Back then, we were optimistic about surgical strikes, but if they have gone this deep, is a surgical strike even a reality anymore? Or are we looking at a situation where we have to use repeated high-yield strikes just to try and collapse the entire mountain structure?
That is the grim reality of the physics involved. If you want to guarantee the destruction of a facility 80 meters down, you are not talking about one precision bomb. You are talking about a sustained campaign of multiple heavy penetrators hitting the exact same spot to essentially drill through the rock. But there is a massive risk there. If you actually succeed in breaching the containment of a facility that is holding high levels of enriched uranium, or worse, uranium hexafluoride gas, you run the risk of radioactive dispersal. It is not a nuclear explosion, obviously, but it is a dirty bomb effect created by conventional means. This is the dilemma for planners in Washington and Jerusalem. Do you risk the fallout to ensure neutralization, or do you settle for a mission kill and hope they do not dig themselves out in 6 months? The math of the GBU-57 just doesn't favor a clean solution when you are dealing with granite that thick.
And that is just the sites we know about. Let's pivot to what I think is a much more difficult problem, the shell game strategy. We have seen reports of Iran utilizing dual-use industrial sites. I am talking about places that look like pharmaceutical labs or high-tech manufacturing plants. These are not buried under mountains. They are sitting in the middle of cities or industrial parks. How do we distinguish between a legitimate factory making medical isotopes and a clandestine enrichment cell, especially when the equipment for both can look remarkably similar to an untrained eye or a low-resolution sensor?
This is where the intelligence challenge becomes almost impossible to solve with just satellites. Centrifuges for uranium-235 enrichment require very specific components, like high-frequency inverters and miraging steel. In the past, we could track the procurement of these items through traditional export controls, but in 2025 we saw the emergence of what intelligence agencies are calling the shadow procurement network. They are using AI to manage thousands of shell companies and microtransactions. They are buying the components for 10,000 centrifuges, one piece at a time, spread across 500 different companies in 30 different countries. By the time the parts reach Iran, they are just generic industrial components. They are hiding the signal in the noise of global trade.
It is the digitization of the nuclear supply chain. If you cannot stop the parts from coming in, and you cannot see the facilities from space, you are left with a massive verification gap. This reminds me of the nuclear truck concept we discussed in episode 697. If you can fit a meaningful enrichment capability into a few shipping containers, you can move your entire program every 72 hours. During a war, when there are thousands of trucks moving supplies to the front lines, how do you pick out the one carrying the centrifuges? You are looking for a needle in a field of needles.
You hit the nail on the head, Korn. This is the decentralization of the threat. If the program is centralized at a place like Natanz or Fordau, it is a target. If it is decentralized into 20 different mobile or small-scale urban sites, it becomes an intelligence nightmare. And here's the thing about the fog of war. In a kinetic conflict, the Iranians know that our surveillance assets are stretched thin. We are looking for mobile missile launchers. We are tracking troop movements. We are monitoring air defenses. They can use that high-tempo environment to move material under our noses. It is the perfect time to relocate a few kilograms of 60% enriched uranium to a location we have never even heard of. They are using the chaos of the conventional war to secure the future of their nuclear deterrent.
So, let me push you on this, Herman. If we are in this situation where remote sensing is limited and the program is dispersed, what does actual verification look like? If the war ends, or if there is a ceasefire, and the Iranian government says, okay, we've neutralized the program, how do we actually prove it? We have seen how they have handled the International Atomic Energy Agency, or IAEA, in the past. They have cleaned up sites, they have paved over areas, they have denied access to inspectors. Is there any technical way to verify neutralization without a total, boots-on-the-ground occupation of the entire country? Which, let's be honest, is not on the table for anyone.
That is the million-dollar question, and honestly, the answer from a technical perspective is quite sobering. Without physical access to the sites, and I mean unrestricted, anytime, any place access, you can never be 100% sure. However, there are some emerging technologies in the field of multimodal sensor fusion that give us a fighting chance. We are talking about things like persistent seismic monitoring. Even if they mask the thermal signature, running thousands of centrifuges at 60,000 revolutions per minute creates a very specific, high-frequency seismic hum. If we have a dense enough network of sensors in the region, we can pick up that vibration even through deep rock. It is like a stethoscope for the Earth.
Wait, let me stop you there. A seismic hum. Can you actually distinguish the vibration of a centrifuge cascade from, say, a nearby industrial generator or the vibrations of a city? I mean, Tehran is a noisy place.
It is incredibly difficult, but it is possible with AI-driven signal processing. Centrifuges have a very consistent, very pure frequency signature because they have to be perfectly balanced to avoid crashing. An industrial generator is noisy and irregular by comparison. The challenge is that you need the sensors to be relatively close to the site. You cannot do this from a satellite. You need ground-based sensors, or at the very least, very sensitive microphones on low-flying drones. During a war, those drones are getting shot down, and those ground sensors are getting discovered. So again, we come back to the same problem. The conflict itself makes the verification harder, not easier. We are trying to listen for a whisper in the middle of a heavy metal concert.
It is almost like the more we strike them, the more they are incentivized to hide the program in ways that make it impossible to verify. It is a vicious cycle. We are winning the war on missiles, but we might be losing the war on proliferation because we are forcing the program into the shadows. I want to talk about that shadow procurement network you mentioned earlier. You said they identified a major network in 2025. How did they do that? If the transactions are that small and that dispersed, what was the giveaway? There has to be a weak point in the AI logic.
It was actually a failure in their own logistics, AI. They were using an automated system to coordinate the shipping of these components, and it made a mistake. It routed 3 different shipments of high-strength carbon fiber through the same port in Southeast Asia at the exact same time. An analyst at a private intelligence firm noticed the coincidence and started pulling the thread. They found that these 3 shell companies, which on paper had nothing to do with each other, all shared the same digital signature in their encrypted communications. It was a tiny mistake, a 1 in a million glitch, but it allowed the West to map out a huge part of the network. But here is the scary part, Korn. That was just one network. How many others are out there that haven't made a mistake yet? We only see the failures. We don't see the successes.
That is the second-order effect of these kinetic strikes. It forces the adversary to become more efficient and more resilient. If we destroy their main procurement office, they don't just stop. They create 5 new ones that are even more decentralized. It is like trying to kill a hydra. And this brings us to a really important point for our listeners. When you are reading the news and you see that a major Iranian nuclear site has been hit, don't just assume the threat is gone. You have to look at the supply chain. If the material is still there, and the knowledge is still there, and the procurement networks are still active, they can rebuild a modular enrichment capability in months, not years. The hardware is replaceable. The enriched material and the expertise are not.
The knowledge is the one thing you can't bomb. The Iranian nuclear scientists are some of the best in the world. They have been doing this for decades. They have the blueprints, they have the expertise, and as we discussed in episode 823, they have already mastered the final percent of the enrichment process. Once you know how to do it, the physical hardware is just a matter of time and resources. This is why some analysts are arguing that we need to shift our focus from site-based inspection to supply chain intelligence. We need to be looking at the flow of specialized materials and the movement of key personnel, rather than just looking for big buildings with cooling towers. We need to track the people, not just the concrete.
That is a huge shift in how we think about national security. It is moving from a kinetic mindset to a data-driven, intelligence-led mindset. But I can hear the counter-argument already. People will say, look, if we don't hit the sites, they would just build the bomb. We have to do something. And I agree with that. We can't just sit back and watch. But we have to be honest about what a kinetic strike actually achieves. It buys time. It doesn't solve the problem. The only way to solve the problem is to make it physically impossible for them to get the materials they need. We need to turn the shadow procurement network into a liability.
And that is getting harder every day. In the past, you needed massive, specialized factories to build centrifuges. Today, with high-end 3D printing and advanced carbon fiber composites, you can manufacture many of these components in a much smaller footprint. We are approaching a world where a sovereign state with enough resources can essentially print a nuclear program in a series of basement workshops. If that happens, the idea of nuclear neutralization through bombing becomes a complete fantasy. We would be looking at a permanent state of high alert where we are constantly playing whack-a-mole with thousands of potential sites. The barrier to entry for enrichment is dropping even as the barrier to detection is rising.
This is where I want to bring in the regional perspective. We are sitting here in Jerusalem, and for Israel, this isn't an academic exercise. This is an existential reality. If the nuclear program is hidden rather than destroyed, it creates a permanent shadow over the region. Even if the conventional war ends, the threat remains. It means that any future conflict could escalate to the nuclear level in a matter of days. That changes the entire geopolitical calculus for the United States, for the Abraham Accords partners, and for everyone else in the Middle East. It creates a hair-trigger environment where miscalculation leads to catastrophe.
It really does. It creates a zero-knowledge verification problem. If I tell you I have destroyed my weapons, but I won't let you look in my basement, and I have a history of lying about what is in my basement, you have to assume the weapons are still there. That lack of trust is the fundamental driver of conflict. And during a war, trust is at an all-time low. So, we are in this situation where the only way to be sure is to win so decisively that you can dictate the terms of the inspection regime. But as we have seen in modern warfare, decisive victories are rare and incredibly costly. We are more likely to end up in a stalemate where the nuclear program remains the ultimate wild card.
So, let's talk about some practical takeaways for our listeners. When they are following the news, what should they be looking for? If the missile counts aren't the whole story, what are the metrics that actually matter for nuclear neutralization? Because I think people are getting a false sense of security from the interception rates.
First and foremost, you have to look at the International Atomic Energy Agency reports. Don't just look at the headlines. Look for mentions of undeclared material. That is the key phrase. If the inspectors are saying there are kilograms of uranium that they can't account for, that is a massive red flag. It means there is a hidden stockpile somewhere. Second, pay attention to the reports on Iranian procurement. If you see news about the US or its allies breaking up a smuggling ring for miraging steel or high-frequency inverters, that is a sign that the program is still trying to grow or maintain its hardware. Those are the real battlegrounds.
And I would add a third one. Watch the movement of the scientists. If the top nuclear engineers in Iran suddenly disappear from public view or are moved to undisclosed locations, that is a strong indicator that they are working on a clandestine project. We saw this in the past with the Ahmad plan. They kept the core team together even after they officially halted the program. The people are the program. If you see the personnel being safeguarded, you can bet the program is being safeguarded too. You can't have an enrichment program without the people who know how to balance the rotors.
That is a great point, Korn. And for the more technically minded listeners, keep an eye on the developments in persistent multimodal sensor fusion. There are companies and government agencies working on ways to combine satellite data, seismic data, and even social media sentiment analysis to identify clandestine activity. It is a new kind of intelligence, what some call open source nuclear forensics. It is not perfect, but it is a lot better than just relying on a single satellite photo of a hole in the ground. We are looking for the digital and physical exhaust of a program that is trying to be invisible.
It really feels like we are entering a new era of warfare, where the most important battles are happening in the invisible realms of data and supply chains. The missiles are the part that everyone sees, the part that makes for good television. But the nuclear program is the part that defines the future of the region. If we can't solve the verification problem, we are just kicking the can down the road. And the road is getting shorter. We are running out of pavement.
It is, and it brings us back to that zero knowledge problem. Can we ever truly be sure a program is gone? In a world of deep underground bunkers and modular technology, the answer might be no. We might have to move from a goal of total neutralization to a goal of permanent intrusive containment. That is a much harder sell to a public that wants a clear victory, but it might be the only realistic path forward. We have to be honest about the limitations of kinetic power. You can't bomb an idea, and you can't bomb a supply chain that exists entirely in the shadows. We need a strategy that accounts for the things we cannot see.
This has been a heavy one, but I think it is so necessary to have this conversation. We can't let ourselves get distracted by the spectacle of conventional war while the real threat is being moved and hidden. We have to keep our eyes on the ball, which in this case is the enrichment capability and the material itself. I want to thank Daniel for sending this in. It is one of those prompts that forces you to really look at the uncomfortable reality of modern conflict. It moves us past the surface level analysis.
It is easy to celebrate a successful missile interception, and we should because those interceptions save lives. But we can't let that success blind us to the deeper, more complex challenge of nuclear proliferation. It is a multi-dimensional problem that requires a multi-dimensional solution. We need the kinetic options, yes, but we also need the intelligence, the diplomacy, and the technical innovation to close that verification gap. We need to be as creative in our detection as they are in their deception.
Well said, Herman. And before we wrap up, I just want to say to our listeners, if you are finding these deep dives valuable, please take a moment to leave us a review on your podcast app or on Spotify. We have been doing this for a long time, over 1,000 episodes now, and your feedback really is what keeps us going. It helps other people find the show and join the conversation. We are building a community of people who want to look deeper.
It really does. We read every review and we appreciate the support more than we can say. And remember, you can always find our full archive and the RSS feed at myweirdprompts.com. We have covered so many aspects of this over the years, from the physics of enrichment in episode 509 to the specific challenges of striking nuclear sites in episode 716. If you want to go even deeper, the website is the place to be. We have the receipts for all of these technical claims.
Definitely. There is a lot of history there that helps make sense of what is happening today. The world doesn't stand still, and neither does the technology of proliferation. We have to keep learning and keep asking these hard questions. So, what is the final thought for today, Herman? Are we winning the war on missiles while losing the war on proliferation?
I think we are at a crossroads. We have the capability to defend against the missiles, but we haven't yet mastered the art of verifying the neutralization of a decentralized underground nuclear program. Until we do, the threat will continue to evolve. We are in a race between the hiders and the seekers, and right now, the hiders have some very powerful advantages. Our job is to make sure the seekers have the tools they need to close the gap. The future depends on our ability to see through the mountain.
A race between the hiders and the seekers. I like that. It is a perfect way to frame the next decade of global security. Well, that is all the time we have for today. Thank you all for listening to my weird prompts. It has been a pleasure, as always, to dive into these complex topics with you, Herman.
Likewise, corn. It is always a highlight of my week.
All right, everyone, we will be back soon with another prompt. Until then, stay curious, stay informed, and keep looking past the headlines. This has been my weird prompts.
Take care, everyone. We will see you in the next one. Bye for now.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, my weird prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to facts on cue. We change and follow through. My weird prompts, that's the close from sloth, from man, from long-eared host. My weird prompts, until next time, stay curious, keep